Welcome, everyone. Hello, my name is Elena Martinez. I'm the technical manager for this session. This session is called The History of Agri-Food Systems. Thank you so much for taking part in ANH 2025. We're really looking forward to a robust and interactive session today. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Shreya Chakrabarty from the International Water Management Institute to get the session started. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. So let me just, without wasting any time, introduce you to the team and to what we'll be covering today. Thank you so much for joining. I see people are joining from different parts of the world. So good afternoon to some of you. Good morning to some of you. Okay, good evening to everybody. I'm based in Bangladesh, so it's 5 p.m. here. So hi everyone. So what we will be covering today is essentially we're looking at agri-food systems, and we're looking at a historical perspective. That's the goal of the Learning Lab. We have a phenomenal group of instructors to sort of handhold you through this lesson. It's 2 hours versus an entire course that you really need to understand this method properly. So please forgive us for not being able to cover everything. It's a crash course, but we're really hoping that what we're able to do today is maybe trigger a little question, trigger some curiosity about the method and about approaching a problem from a historical lens, and hoping that what you take away from here is to see if you want to read up more and understand more about how to do this kind of method and analysis. We'll be building today's work based on a number of case studies that we worked on with Amy and with this phenomenal group of researchers under a CGR program called Transforming Agri-Food Systems in South Asia last year, in the last 3 years. And we were hoping to build on that and really pull together some of the methodological aspects that we saw and learned about. This is your group of instructors that are on your screen. So we have Haris from Pakistan. He's a director and senior researcher from the Collective for Social Science Research. Dr. Anindita, who has enormous amount of work on India and Bangladesh. She's based at ZEF at the University of Bonn in Germany. Dr. Fraser, he is with the University of Birmingham, really good political economist, who's a human geographer by training and has been working on Nepal for years. And I'm Shreya. I'm representing the International Water Management Institute in Bangladesh. And this sort of covers some of the countries that we will also be covering in our training today, and hoping that you will be able to look at your own regions from this perspective. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a provocation, and take you from the way we usually think about a problem to maybe see if a historical perspective can change the way we talk about or think about a problem, right? So think about it. So imagine a region where farmers keep growing paddy, and it's a drought-prone region. It has sustainability issues with regard to water resources. It has depleting water resources. And when the government advises to switch to millets, they don't. They don't easily move to millets. So generally, when we do a lot of our economic and technical analysis, we come to solution inferences like, well, farmers are risk averse, they're culturally attached to rice. So what we need, the solutions we need are, well, you need awareness campaigns, you need subsidies for millets, and that's going to work. And then suddenly you get this piece of information from a historical perspective where you realize, now you imagine that 40 years ago, these same farmers were pressured through the Green Revolution, for instance, through a loan linked scheme, where they were asked and they were pushed through multiple mechanisms to move away from a diverse cropping practice towards rice. And millet production was essentially overtly associated by them in that process with poverty and backwardness, and therefore moving to rice was considered to be something of an aspiration. If you know this bit, would you still promote the same solutions that you did earlier? And how could it potentially change? So now that we know that millets are, it's not just about awareness or it's not just about subsidies, but the fact that there is a path dependency and a stigma around millet, which means that so you don't just have to fix the production and the knowledge. What you have to also fix, you have to fix markets. You have to fix demand for it because the demand doesn't exist. You have to change the way people look at millets or understand this crop or, even think about it. So then suddenly your solution changes, right? So what you would do is you would now need market systems, you would need public procurement, you would recommend nutritional subsidies, you would recommend media campaigns to improve the way a particular crop is perceived. In addition, you would also require credit. You would need to make sure that the farmer can genuinely profit and not deal with any amount of risk for this new crop that they are now being forced or being asked to shift to, because they've already associated it with a lot of negatives in their past. And now they have to move beyond it. So the kind of solutions that you now start thinking about when you look at it historically is different from the way you would recommend a solution when you did not know this piece of information. So moving to, therefore, why history matters. So historical analysis, a lot of us just think that it's about getting your timelines. There are a lot of papers that you'll find with beautiful timelines of how policies moved and how they developed. But that's not where it starts and ends. So history ends up mattering because there are certain questions. So you have to look at these timelines critically. You have to ask critical questions and identify where this diagnosis comes from. So some of the key questions that we ask through our historical process is, how did the system become what it is today? How did we come here? Who shaped its evolution is very important, because which interests were being served, because who was benefiting from the system that was created, and if those power systems still survive today, would they be okay with shifting, with changing that system? If it was benefiting them earlier, would they want to change it? Then you start questioning, for instance, when you look at history, that what part of the problems that we see today come from because they've persisted for decades, sometimes centuries, and which part of the history actually changed. Some parts of history have shifted, but others have not. So then you also ask the question that what changed and why, and what did not change and why. It gives you a completely different aspect to understanding why our current problems look the way they do. So number one, like I said, so just a quick summary, that it goes beyond chronology. You ask the questions about how, who, and what, and essentially aim to reveal power, exclusion, who does it benefit, what continues, what persists, and what changes and why. It also helps you to understand that a lot of the problems of the current system did not appear yesterday. It did not even appear 5 years back. Some of the things might have appeared 100 years back. Some of them could have started 50 years back. Something that's going on for 50 years isn't going to change because we gave one technical solution, and it's not going to change next year. So unless you understand the roots of the problem, from where our current situation comes from, it's going to be very difficult to even have a timeline for where you're moving and what needs to be done to get there. So therefore, in terms of, say, food security, it also helps you to understand the question of who and where. It's not just about the same system working for everybody, but a particular system benefited some people and went against others. So it also helps you to understand why certain groups and regions have food and nutrition security, whereas others don't. So some of these questions can be very critically accessed historically. Now, from a food systems perspective, history becomes even more important, because when you're looking at a system, you're looking at a very complex system. You're not just looking at food. So food is just the outcome. But the determinants that go into, bringing food security out, this outcome essentially is a function of so many determinants that could have this production. You need markets, you need policy and institutions to work in your favor. You need infrastructure that, that is aligned. So when you look at a system, historical perspectives become even more important, because different parts of the system move differently. Different parts of the system have had their own independent trajectories, and they have moved differently, right? So some parts of the system are easier to move. Maybe technology can shift within a few years, but institutions, maybe policy can shift in decades. Maybe institutions would shift, would probably stick around for half a century, for more. So different parts of the system move differently. So it becomes important to know that the outcome, the system that we are looking at today in 2025, some parts of it have actually come from way back in the late 1800s and 1900s in some regions in some countries. And some parts of the system probably just emerged 5 to 10 years back. So, therefore, if you have to understand systems and systems transformation, historical lenses become even more important, because it becomes important to know what aspect of the system has persisted and is holding back a lot of the new solutions that we are looking for and the new changes that we are recommending. So let me just go into some key concepts. Haris, you're on my screen, so you just have to lift your hand when I'm at like the 5 minute margin. Okay. Okay. So some key concepts that will be really useful to understand some of the case studies that we'll be doing and presenting after this. And it's sort of some of your key takeaways from today's lecture is going to be why history matters, right? So understanding how this historical inquiry actually contributes to diagnosing the problem at hand. So we have about 5 key concepts that we'll go through today. So one is path dependency, which essentially tells you is that the way things have been a certain way, the way they've been done a certain way tends to get locked in. These are pathways that get locked in, and they're difficult to change, whether it's technology or policy intervention. Something that was already done a certain way and has been done for a long time tends to get locked in into some potentials, the only solutions that are now possible. So they restrict the kind of changes that we are able to recommend today. Therefore, the diagnosis being that not all problems are fixable with new solutions. You really have to understand that a lot of what is going on is deeply entrenched in legacy arrangements. So very simply is to say that decisions made in the past, they shape what we do today. So even when we look at a new solution that we propose, they get stuck in old choices, or they get modified so that they fit beautifully in our old ways of doing things. So even when we have a brand new solution, you suddenly realize that in different regions they have modified themselves to fit into the context, because it means that it's become, so we always end up taking the easier route, because taking a new route requires all of these structural changes that we generally never recommend, that we never move towards. Now, institutional persistence and inertia is that institutions specifically, more than anything else, tend to get stuck in the way. They're difficult to move. They're heavy. They've been built over years. These are cultural aspects. There are sort of legal aspects to it, things that get defined in a certain way. They evolve slowly, and then they don't move easily, right? They resist change. And therefore, what happens is institutional legacies get set in. So a lot of the things that we see, whether they are governance failures, inequalities that we see, a lot of these happen because there's a lot of misalignment between the institutions that were built and why they were built, and what they're sort of moving towards, right? So they don't align with the contemporary challenges. So we find that they tend to hold a lot of the change. And even when they no longer work well, it's very difficult to move them. So then we have, say, narratives. Sorry. Okay. We have narratives and historical memory, which is that people generally think about historical pieces in certain dominant stories. Something was good, something was bad. So it is through these sort of historical narratives that we've already decided what is a solution and what is not. Something that didn't work yesterday and might work today, we would not take it because it didn't work in the past, right? So when people shifted to Green Revolution earlier in history and said, well, no, millet's bad. So when you try to bring them back, they're now stuck in historical memory in a certain way. So they don't move again easily. You cannot bring those back because you've already built certain dominant discourses. So therefore, counter narratives become very important. So in things like Green Revolution in South Asia, which happened where you only see the image of the rich farmer, high productivity, etc., but you never really hear the stories about who did not benefit from certain policy moves. So you always have this good and bad and this sort of black and white, and you never realize. So these counter narratives therefore become really important to challenge something that you considered really good in the past or something that you considered bad in the past, and to think about alternate solutions in the future. And finally, the fourth is that there's contingency and unintended consequences, that a lot of the things that we see coming out today, essentially, a lot of the outcomes that we see may not have been intended at all. They just happened, right? They just happened over time. So it becomes really important to know that not all of the outcomes that were part of the planning of these historical processes, but over the years they have come. But this challenges this sort of linear thinking. And that's also something that we think when we give recommendations for solutions, that you have to think of the trade-offs. You have to think that when you scale a particular solution, what are the other problems that could have? So that's how this sort of historical learning can help you in giving you the new solution. So things don't always go as planned, right? So to be adaptive in terms of the solutions that we provide and to be able to look in terms of trade-offs becomes a very important learning. And finally, there's a lot of temporal layering and multi-scalar history. So for instance, when you do historical analysis, you realize it's not just time, it's also scale that matters. So something that happens at a global scale can affect what's happening culturally today. Something that happened culturally in a very local space years ago can be affecting how global history or how the global economy is working today. So it requires historical attention to both time and scale. We'll move beyond this. So just to quickly end my presentation is that some of the key methods, so there are different ways in which you can look at historical analysis. So a lot of us would do, say, historical institutionalism, which means that you would look at how institutions, policies have changed over time. You could do archival policy document analysis, etc., which is more institution-centered. Then what you'll see from some of our case studies is, say, agrarian political economy, which is looking at linkages between land, labor, capital, state, for instance, how these dynamics move over time and how they tend to persist and get our agri-food systems locked into certain ways of being. There are food regime analysis, which is very specific. So for instance, you could have production, trade, and consumption and how these have shifted. Environmental history, you'll find in one of the case studies from Bangladesh, which we'll present today, which is on socio-ecological systems, where you look at how interactions between human societies and environment and ecological systems change, right? And how this sort of iterative process can bring about what we're going through and what we see today. And oral histories and narratives, which means that you can have something not just from theory, but from the bottom up. You can actually find where the history and how it sets in just from our field. So having just quickly gone through some of these key concepts, which I'm hoping that over the case studies you will hear more about, and you'll be able to recognize them when you hear them in the coming few minutes. So let me just quickly take you through the next steps. So you're here, you're the key concepts. We're going to now move into 3 breakout sessions with the case studies. There will be 3 breakout rooms. One is studying a drought-prone semi-arid region of Pakistan. One will be on a mountainous, another critical ecosystem, the mountainous Nepal, and one is a flood-prone, humid deltaic Bangladesh belt. Now, different contexts could appeal to, different people from different parts of the world. So please feel free to pick the breakout room that you think you would be interested to listen to. These are 3 different case studies from a historical perspective. And we're hoping that these sort of build some foundations and you'll be able to recognize some of these concepts there. Once you come back, we will have a little plenary where I will explain a group exercise that we will go into. We'll have 4 breakout groups, after which we'll have a presentation back from all of you. Just to quickly give you a little insight into what you will be expected to do later on so that you're prepared. And when you listen, please listen very, very carefully, because from the case studies, you will learn how to go about doing the exercises. So you'll have 4 different themes and 4 breakout rooms. Each of you will take one theme, and then you'll have to identify one challenge as a group that you will then assess historically. So what we want is 4 slides, right? So you will first introduce us, because we will be looking at these slides later on and you're presenting it back to us. We would like to know what are the different forms of agriculture, what are the major crops that they grow, for instance, what are the different kinds of agriculture that's done there? What are the major land and irrigation systems? What kind of tenure systems? What kind of irrigation systems are primarily there? What are the major cropping patterns? What are the major markets, for instance? What level of markets, whether it's, how much of global access, national level markets, local markets, how much access there is, etc. And food security and nutrition, what are the key issues around food security and nutrition access? What are the major gaps there? So this will set up a context for that particular region. Then the group will have to identify this one challenge. And this is where you might want to spend more time. You might have 3 or 4, 5 challenges coming in for the group. Put them all down but select one because it would be impossible to look at 5 challenges in 30 minutes. So please identify a single challenge that everybody finds compelling for that particular region. And then what we want you to do is together recommend solutions without thinking about anything else. Just recommend first solutions that you ideally know have worked with or think that particular challenge needs. After which, the third slide, we will be looking at some historical turning points. So we will be looking at think in terms of political history, economic history. You don't have to go into 500 years back, just go into 50, whatever it is that you think is most relevant for that particular region. And look at some of the turning points, key turning points from that region that may be relevant to that particular challenge at hand. So in South Asia, we gave you examples of, say, Green Revolution that was really important, the decolonization that was really important, and you know how these different countries emerge from colonial histories or historical past, for instance. It could be, for instance, in South Asia, we had moments of, aspects of restructuring, economic restructuring, opening up, trade shifts, etc., that may have affected. So identify some key turning points for that region. And then in the fourth, you will revisit the solutions that you recommended in slide 2. We'll revisit them and see whether the same solutions you want to continue recommending. Are there other things that you think may be required to overcome that challenge? And just consider or put in some implications or put in why you think any of these historical turning points or discussions may have led you to making any changes in these recommended solutions. So this is what you will be doing for the next I think 40 minutes. Hello and welcome back. That was a challenging exercise, right? I mean, even taking you through the whole thing. See, 40 minutes is not enough to spend 2 years studying historical analysis, and then even experts spend months on understanding these things. But I just wanted to check with Ainditam and Haris if you made more progress. Were you able to complete the exercise that you would want to present? Because if not, then
Yes, we had a
yeah,
very
Haris.
active team in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
And so they were actually, it's very interesting that we had, I think, six or seven people in the chat, and then they had 6 or 7 people on their side as well, so in their room. So,
Okay.
and they have, I think, we've learned a great deal from that exercise, and they will present. So they did rapporteuring and presenting, and we had some other people who contributed also.
Okay. So who's going to present from the group?
Michelle, over to you again, and you can share your screen with the same presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So over to you, Michelle.
Okay. Hi, everyone from Trinidad and Tobago, our team here, Nutrition and Ministry of Health. So we are doing today, our group did the Caribbean region, and we had like a specific example. We used our own country in the region to fine-tune some examples. So for the forms of agriculture, we have in most of the islands short-term crops, tomatoes, cucumber, eggplant, most of those types of crops, string beans, we have traditional farming, but a lot of small scale farming going on, and hydroponic farming is very popular. Now we have to mention that we had an anomaly in the Caribbean. Guyana is our most food secure CARICOM country. So they are the only ones who are in that, who have that status granted to them. So the rest of us, we're still open to reach that level. In terms of land and irrigation systems, we have, we use a lot of, natural methods. So like we have some places where we do natural sloping of the land for certain types of herbs and so on. We have a lot of seasonal type cropping, as mentioned before, and our markets, we have our domestic, but we also have our export markets for exotic produce and so on, exotic fruits and vegetables. And a huge threat to us in terms of our food and security is, climate change and flooding during wet season, we have wet and dry season, which is now we have our wet season. So we have a lot of flash flooding that destroys a lot of these short-term crops. And it's a huge, financial loss to a lot of farmers, small-scale farmers.
Next slide.
Yeah. And so our challenges and recommended solutions. Food waste, we have as a huge challenge. A lot of the times we have food waste, a lot of more food waste, at the household level. We have some food waste as well at the harvest level. We have it at all levels really, yeah. But I think we did find some reasonable statistics for the household level being the most, possibly. 2022 statistics showed us that we have a lot of household level food waste. So we were saying that possibly to deal with some of it, we had to establish relationships with our charitable organizations here locally. We have a lot for donation of like wholesome food. As mentioned before, yes, we have the harvest level issues as well. And our historical turning point. So we had in the 70s, particularly in our country, we had the closing down and shutting down of our last set of plantations. Now, these plantations were actually very central to our food nutrition security for the entire country because we had a lot of large-scale farming going on at the time. And it was not just sugarcane, it was a large variety of crops, citrus, we had a lot of coconut, we had a whole set of diverse set of crops at the time. So we had rice as well. We had a lot of different types of food. And we no longer do that. We've just switched to small scale farming. So for example, we don't get rice from Trinidad anymore. We have to go to Guyana to get rice. So the challenges, we have a lot of small scale farming alone. And our recommended solutions now, we were saying that we should have some separation at the source at the household level, and the implications of the historical turning points. We probably need to have a lot more value added products at that harvest level to reduce the food waste as well, and to better utilize our export markets to assist the issue. We also started to have incentive for some farmers at the Ministry of Agriculture level, but we still need to reach out more to farmers because a lot of farmers still don't know. They have a lot of facilities, like storage facilities and things to dehydrate the products or, probably turn their products into some other usable form. They don't know about those facilities. Somebody in our group as well mentioned implementing climate sensitive, resilient, crops like cassava, breadfruit, sweet potatoes. We really do need to farm most of those type of products. And, as mentioned before, we really didn't know what closing our plantations would have done. That resulted in us importing most of our food. We have about 80 to 90% food imports, unfortunately, as a result, but very, very little local going into our domestic markets. And that's our case study there.
That's really cool. It's amazing that you guys actually finished that exercise. Thank you so much, Michelle. Is there another? Did you have did your group want to present?
Yes, Moses, you could present.
Thank
We
you,
have
thank you.
Tanzania as our case study.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I will be presenting the case of Tanzania, as I also came from Tanzania, and I will be happy to see you in-person session. In our group, we discussed, on the following. From the forms of agriculture which are dominated in our country, mainly is subsistence agriculture, where small farms are being cultivated, involving food crops and some other cash crops. The type of land and irrigation system we a large portion of the farms depending on rain-fed agriculture. So we largely depend on rain. Most of the cropping patterns, we have food crops. Most of our farm, we grow food crops like maize, rice, sorghum, millet, but we also have horticultural crops, including fruits and vegetables, and avocado being one among the crops for export. In the issue of market, we have medium relatively form of market system. We have farm gate market, whereas farmers take the produce to the local markets, but we also have the crop vendors or crop blockers or crop middlemen who moderate the trade between the farmers and the buyers. But also we have the cooperative system whereby some cash crops are sold in a specialized cooperative system. And most of the crops in cooperative system are cash crops, including tobacco, cotton, and sisal. In the issue of food security, the country is food secure. The country, Tanzania, has a specialized system under the Ministry of Agriculture, whereby during a high harvesting, the crops are collected and stored by a specialized authority called the NFRA, and then so where there'll be instances of hunger, then the crops, the produce will be sold to the individuals at a relative lower cost as compared to the market price. So generally, the country is food secure and it is food sufficient, and we are even sold the food to the neighboring countries.
We have 1 minute to wrap up.
Okay.
Let's move to the challenge.
To conclude, one among the...
No, let's move to the challenge, Moses. Yeah, what's the challenge that you guys worked on?
The major challenge is we are depending on rain-fed agriculture. And as we all know that the globe is having a challenge of climatic change. So depending on rain to feed the crops becoming a very big problem. To solve this, we think that the multi-sectoral collaboration to improve irrigation infrastructure would help the situation. Thank you.
And therefore, what were the historical aspects that you thought of? Is that a part of? Yeah.
Yes, this was one of the things we could come up with. We couldn't come up with a solution, but when we found a solution, we discussed that how that solution may work, may not work, because there is a historical, we have to look at it from a historical lens. And then we found out about how land was centrally controlled and what happened during the colonial time and how legislations have come about. So Moses, you could talk about it a bit more.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think the issue of the historical perspective of the historical trend has something to do with the current situation. So from our discussion, although we failed to conclude because there are a different system of land ownership from during the colonialism to post-colonialism. But generally, what we have concluded is that those types of land ownership prohibit or challenge in one way or another the investment in the infrastructures, and specifically irrigation infrastructure. But currently, the government is trying to see how it can facilitate irrigation agriculture by supporting the investment in agricultural infrastructures.
That's really cool. So it's essentially about the way land tenure is managed in that country, which hinders investment, right, in irrigation. which is why one of the reasons why irrigation hasn't developed much. Is that the correct understanding?
It is not directly related concern, and even in our discussion, I raised a doubt on that. You know, a large percent of the people in Tanzania who are farmers are resource poor farmers. The people who can't even afford some of their basic needs. So it is not economic. A person who even fails to satisfy him or herself that he can invest in irrigation infrastructure. That's why they are solely depend on rainfall. That's why I suggested that if all the parties, including the individual farmers, the government, and other collaborators would join hands to facilitate irrigation agriculture, we could bring changes, because relying only on irrigation, on rain-fed, would not giving any help in this climatic change era.
Thank you, Moses. That was great. So it sort of brought out the linkage between land and water and how land histories can affect, investment in new technologies and new infrastructure, right? So, I mean, this is a very, very small time to actually do any historical real analysis. But I think the idea throughout, so the third group essentially was looking at some interesting questions around Nigeria, where, it's a drought-prone region, but where civil wars, for instance, has played a very major role in determining food security and whether farmers feel safe in going to the farm, etc. Right? So there are a lot of political institutional aspects around. So most of the times when we do climate change, we are like, oh, we want drought-resistant seeds, we want climate-resilient practices, but we don't think about the politics, we don't think about the history, institutions, and practices that need to change, right? And what is it that's difficult to move in terms of policy? So we are already 8 minutes over time, and I'm scared of Alina giving me a warning now, so I'm going to wrap this up. But I just want to take the last 2 minutes to just wrap up some of the points that we did right from the beginning, right? So what we did was we identified some of the key reasons why history plays a role. History is not the sole determinant of every current problem, but history is an important piece of the puzzle that we generally miss. It is the part which is structural, the things that don't easily change. When you keep thinking that, oh, I'm constantly trying to change this problem, why is it not changing? We've invested so much money into this solution. Why is it not changing as much as we want to? Usually the problem lies in some of these sticky things that remain within the system structurally from history. So it always helps that whenever you look at a problem that has been very difficult to change in your region, in your context, in your studies, look historically a little bit and identify where that problem has emerged from and what aspect of the solution are we missing when we start talking to government, policymakers, to anybody who is offering a part of the solution. What part of the solution is currently missing from our thought process? And can we think alternatively about more, even if it's difficult, right? If it needs to change, then you have to make those recommendations. So the correct diagnosis of the problem is really, really important. Otherwise, you will keep giving a little, people keep thinking that, oh, it's a fever, but no one's looked at the underlying reasons, and that is why the fever keeps coming back. And you're always like, why isn't this going away? Because the infection is still there. So it's a very similar analogy, right? So every time you find that some of your problems have been stuck for years and decades, look back historically and start asking critical questions that what is the solutions that we are not providing, that is inconvenient, that somebody doesn't want it to change. And then maybe we can do our science a little bit better, and then we don't keep talking about the same solutions over and over again that are not working. We can stop reinventing the wheel and look at different kinds of solutions. So I'm going to end at the 10-minute overtime mark. Elena, thank you very much. To all the instructors, phenomenal work. You've put in some time preparing for this. We hope it would have been great to have some more time. But please do go back and read up. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.